Before the sun rose on a cold November morning in 1944, a thin mist hung over a ruined French village. The cobblestone streets were cracked by shellfire, the stone houses hollowed out by artillery. Somewhere inside that maze of rubble, German soldiers waited. They had fortified doorways, cut firing slits into walls, and wired staircases with explosives. American infantry units preparing to enter the town knew exactly what this meant. It would not be a battle of long-range marksmanship. It would be a fight measured in steps, heartbeats, and split-second reactions. And in the hands of a few carefully chosen soldiers, there was a weapon that turned that deadly chaos into something approaching control. A weapon so simple, so brutal in its effectiveness, that it changed how close combat was fought for generations. The men carrying it did not march in neat lines. They moved low, hugging walls, slipping through shattered doorways, listening for movement. Each of them carried a short, heavy firearm loaded with thick shells, their pockets bulging with spare ammunition. The weapon was old by military standards, already decades past its invention, but in the narrow corridors of urban warfare, nothing else came close. When one of these soldiers turned a corner and came face to face with the enemy, there was no prolonged exchange of fire. There was only a deafening blast, a thunderclap in a confined space, and then silence. In moments like these, the shotgun was not just a tool. It was survival. This reputation did not appear overnight. It was built over years of brutal fighting, across continents, in jungles, deserts, and trenches. Long before American troops stormed the beaches of Normandy or fought through the hedgerows of France, the shotgun had already carved out a terrifying legacy. Its story begins far from the ruins of Europe, in the dense heat of the Philippines at the dawn of the 20th century. When American forces first encountered the Moro warriors in the southern islands, they faced a problem they had never experienced before. These fighters did not behave like conventional soldiers. They did not retreat. They did not break ranks. They charged forward with blades raised, driven by religious conviction and ritual preparation that seemed to blunt pain and fear. Standard-issue rifles, firing small-caliber rounds, often failed to stop them quickly enough. Soldiers reported attackers absorbing multiple bullet wounds and still closing the distance. Panic spread through isolated outposts, and officers scrambled for solutions. They found it in an unlikely place, the humble hunting shotgun. At close range, the effect was immediate and decisive. A single blast of buckshot ended charges that rifles could not. Word spread quickly. Units began requisitioning shotguns wherever they could find them. It was not elegant warfare. It was raw and violent. But it worked. The lesson was seared into the memory of those who witnessed it. In close combat, nothing matched the stopping power of a shotgun. That lesson resurfaced years later along the dusty trails of northern Mexico. During the pursuit of Pancho Villa in 1916, American troops once again found themselves fighting in close quarters, ambushed from behind walls and rocky outcroppings. The terrain turned every encounter into a sudden, chaotic clash. And once again, shotguns proved invaluable. They cleared buildings, ended ambushes, and gave small patrols a fighting chance against elusive enemies who knew the land far better than they did. Among the officers who took careful note of this was a general named John J. Pershing. Pershing would carry those memories with him into the greatest conflict the world had ever known. When the United States entered the First World War in 1917, Pershing was placed in command of the American Expeditionary Forces. He read the reports pouring in from Europe. He studied the photographs of shattered landscapes and endless trench networks. He understood immediately what kind of war awaited his men. This would not be a conflict of sweeping maneuvers and grand cavalry charges. It would be a war of inches, fought in mud-filled corridors where visibility was limited and reaction time meant everything. The trenches of the Western Front were claustrophobic labyrinths. They twisted and turned, punctuated by dugouts, firing steps, and narrow junctions. Soldiers lived in constant darkness, dampness, and fear. When attacks came, They came suddenly. Enemy troops would leap into the trench, and combat devolved into frantic, close-range fighting. Long rifles became awkward. Bayonets tangled in sandbags. Pistols lacked the power to stop multiple attackers. Pershing knew what weapon thrived in such conditions. Shotguns were not standard military equipment. They were hunting tools, associated with farms and sporting clubs. But Pershing pushed for their adaptation. Engineers shortened barrels, added heat shields, and fitted bayonet lugs. What emerged was the trench gun, a compact, devastating instrument designed for one purpose: clearing confined spaces. By the time American troops reached the front in significant numbers in 1918, these weapons were in their hands. The effect was immediate and profound. German soldiers, hardened by years of combat, encountered something they had never faced before. The distinctive boom of a shotgun echoed through trenches, followed by chaos. Entire sections could be cleared in seconds. The psychological impact was enormous. Men who had stood firm against artillery barrages and machine gun fire began to hesitate when they heard that sound approaching. Stories spread rapidly. Accounts of American soldiers firing grenades out of the air, of single men storming trench networks, of squads disappearing under a storm of buckshot. Fear took root. German commanders filed formal complaints, arguing that such weapons were inhumane, that they violated the laws of war. Their protests were filled with irony, coming from an army that had unleashed poison gas and flamethrowers on the battlefield. The American response was firm and unyielding. Shotguns remained in service, and their reputation only grew. When the war ended in November 1918, the trench gun might have faded into obscurity, another relic of a conflict that changed the world. Instead, it became a cornerstone of American infantry tactics. 2 decades later, when war once again engulfed the globe, the shotgun returned to the front lines. In the Pacific, American forces confronted a nightmare of dense jungles, fortified bunkers, and hidden tunnel systems. Japanese defenders fought from caves and underground networks, launching sudden attacks at close range. Visibility was often limited to a few yards. Rifles and machine guns struggled to adapt to such conditions. Once more, the shotgun proved indispensable. Marines landing on Guadalcanal scrounged every shotgun they could find. They raided ship armories, traded favors, and ignored paperwork. Officers understood. In the choking humidity and tangled undergrowth, the shotgun was a lifeline. General Alexander Patch himself led assaults carrying one. In cave systems where echoes amplified every sound and shadows concealed deadly threats, the blast of buckshot brought immediate certainty. If something moved in front of you, it would not move again. The battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa cemented this reputation. Japanese soldiers defended elaborate tunnel networks, emerging suddenly to fire and then vanishing back into the darkness. Clearing these positions required nerve, speed, and overwhelming force at close range. Shotgunners moved at the front, their weapons trained on every opening. Each blast echoed through the volcanic rock, sending fragments and dust cascading down. The psychological impact was just as important as the physical. Defenders learned to fear those approaching footsteps, the metallic click of a pump action being worked. By the time the war ended in 1945, the shotgun had become an icon of American close combat doctrine. It had followed soldiers from the trenches of France to the jungles of the Pacific, from shattered European villages to coral atolls under relentless sun. But its journey was far from over. In Korea, bitter winter fighting along frozen ridgelines once again brought American troops into brutal close combat. Chinese forces launched massed night attacks, infiltrating through darkness and snow. In these conditions, visibility was minimal, and reaction time was everything. Shotguns returned to the front, their heavy blasts cutting through thick coats and dense formations. Soldiers spoke of the strange comfort of that familiar weight in their hands, the reassurance that if the enemy suddenly appeared, they had something capable of stopping him instantly. Vietnam took this reliance to another level. Dense jungles, narrow tunnels, and booby-trapped villages created an environment eerily similar to the trenches of the First World War and the caves of the Pacific. Once again, shotguns became indispensable. Tunnel rats, the soldiers tasked with crawling into Viet Cong tunnel systems, often carried cut-down shotguns as their primary weapon. In pitch-black, suffocating spaces, a single blast could mean the difference between life and death. By the 1990s, advances in technology had transformed warfare. Precision-guided munitions, night vision equipment, and automatic weapons reshaped the battlefield. Yet even in this modern context, the shotgun retained a place. Special forces units and military police carried them for breaching doors, clearing rooms, and controlling crowds. The fundamental principle had not changed. When combat closed to a few meters, nothing matched the sheer effectiveness of a shotgun. Throughout this long history, one truth remained constant. The shotgun was never about elegance or precision. It was about certainty. In the chaos of close combat, when fear clouded judgment and milliseconds mattered, it offered a brutal simplicity. Point. Fire. Survive. This is why its legacy endures. Not because it was sophisticated, but because it was honest. It did exactly what it was meant to do, without apology. From muddy trenches to steaming jungles, from frozen hills to shattered cities, the shotgun shaped how soldiers fought and survived. And yet, perhaps the most remarkable aspect of its story is not its effectiveness, but the reaction it inspired. Of all the weapons unleashed in modern warfare, it was the humble hunting gun that provoked outrage, fear, and diplomatic protest. Not artillery that flattened towns. Not gas that suffocated thousands. Not flamethrowers that turned men into living torches. It was a tool designed to bring down birds on a quiet morning that unsettled empires. That contradiction lies at the heart of its legend. The shotgun represents the thin line between civilian life and total war, between peaceful purpose and violent necessity. It reminds us that in conflict, even the simplest objects can become instruments of immense power. Today, modern combat shotguns bear little resemblance to their early predecessors. They are lighter, more reliable, more adaptable. But the philosophy behind them remains unchanged. When soldiers step into tight spaces, when danger lurks just beyond the next doorway, they still reach for a weapon that delivers immediate, decisive force. The story of the shotgun is ultimately a story about adaptation. About how armies learn, improvise, and evolve in the face of new threats. It is a story of fear and ingenuity, of desperation and survival. And it is a reminder that history is often shaped not just by grand strategies and powerful leaders, but by the tools ordinary soldiers carry into extraordinary circumstances. Somewhere in a museum or private collection, an old trench gun rests quietly, its wood worn smooth by long-forgotten hands. It no longer echoes through muddy corridors or jungle tunnels. But its legacy lives on, embedded in military doctrine, battlefield stories, and the collective memory of generations of soldiers. It stands as proof that sometimes, the simplest weapons leave the deepest mark. And as long as wars are fought in close quarters, in shadowed hallways and cramped spaces, the spirit of that old design will endure. Not as a symbol of cruelty, but as a testament to the relentless drive to survive, no matter the cost.